Just about everyone I've spoken with, and let me ask the studio to please get rid of the echo in my headset. I appreciate that. Just about everyone I've spoken with several days has had, guys, can you get rid of the echo, please? Thank you. Has had something to say about Anthony WIENER and why this guy continues to run for mayor of the city of New York, given everything that's swirling around him. I've come to the conclusion if there were no internet, if there were not an opportunity for WIENER to expose himself online, he would be a park trenchcoat flasher. We're going to talk about the likes of Anthony WIENER a little later on in the hour. Dr. Frank Farley will join us. He's a psychologist and past president of the American Psychological Association, frequent contributor to all major U.S. networks. And Aaron Hernandez, 23 years of age, New England Patriots tight end, all-pro. He had his life made. Millions and millions in contracts, no worries for the rest of his life, and now charged with first-degree murder because a friend talked to the wrong people at a bar. Well, ask Dr. Farley to assess that as well. I'm going to begin, though, with Justin Trudeau, the federal Liberal leader, saying that he's changed his view on marijuana and now supports legalizing cannabis. Was this really an epiphany for Mr. Trudeau, or does he sense an opportunity to generate some votes? With me is Jodie Emery from CannabisCulture.com, of course the wife of Mark Emery, who continues to serve time in a U.S. prison for selling marijuana seeds to Americans by way of mail. We'll talk to Jodie about what's going on with her husband, because there are some options that he and she have to exercise, or at least consider exercising, as far as the prison sentence is concerned. But we'll start with Justin Trudeau. Jodie, I would imagine that you're clearly encouraged by Justin Trudeau's statement. He's changed his mind once. Any concerns he might do so again?
Well, it is possible, but we have more and more people like Trudeau joining over to the side of being in favor of legalization and ending prohibition. Not many people are going back the other way. I think in his case, where he has been flip-flopping, admittedly, it's because of the courage that's required to take a firm stand. But at this point, I'm sure he's looked at the numbers of support. He knows that many people who don't even like pot are in favor of ending pot prohibition. So it's not as scary to come out in favor as it may have been even in a year or two ago. Now we've got legalization, and now he has the backing that's required to say this is something we need to do, and we do have support of academics, experts, health officials, premiers, mayors, former prime ministers. There's so many people in favor of ending prohibition, so it's not as scary as he may have thought it was.
You're right. You have police officials of the Union of British Columbia Municipalities, public health officials, past mayors of Vancouver, all supporting ending the marijuana prohibition. There is opposition, though, and it's not just restricted to the Conservative government in Canada. The Obama administration, Democrat, they're continuing to insist that the prohibition of marijuana has to stay in place. One of their concerns is that drop the prohibition on marijuana, and what you do is open the door to legalizing other more potent and arguably more dangerous drugs.
Well, if they're really scared about dangerous, potent drugs that destroy lives, they better shut down every restaurant and bar and liquor store across this country immediately, because that's a drug which we all know causes assault and abuse and rape and property damage and drunk driving. There's so much destruction caused not just by legal alcohol, but by legal pharmaceuticals, legal substances and activities of every sort. But we don't put people in prison for things because they might be dangerous. And in fact, we make things more dangerous when we give them into the hands of criminals, like we're doing with pot and all substances. Everything illegal, from the heroin on the streets to cocaine, it's all illegal, but it's also available in legal forms through pharmaceutical companies. But don't arrest those people who have it legally, just those who have it illegally. This isn't about harm. If we're talking about harm, put everybody in a cell to save us from ourselves. But we're not talking about harm. We're talking about a financial opportunity for not just organized crime, but also police budgets and courts and prisons. There's a lot of people interested in keeping marijuana illegal, even though it doesn't really make sense to most people. And we're depriving taxpayers of billions of dollars that should be going to healthcare and education, which would really protect our communities and our society and our children. But instead, it's wasted away financing a senseless prohibition when we need to control all the dangerous substances. If they're bad for you, then let us control it and educate people about responsible use and help them when they need help, just like we do with alcoholics and people who are addicted to cigarettes, all sorts of things.
I wanted listeners to hear your argument, because what I'm going to ask you at 1-877-399-9898 is whether you agree with Jodie Emery or whether you disagree. See, to me, decriminalizing, and that's been talked about and was suggested by the Chrétien government, is pointless, because what you're going to do is require people, and I've said this so many times before, you'll still require people to buy their drugs or their marijuana from criminalized drug dealers. That's not the way to go. It's either going to be leave the prohibition in place or legalize and control the substance, which is what Justin Trudeau is suggesting. 1-877-399-9898 is my number, 1-877-399-9898. Do you agree with what Jodie Emery just said? Would you be in favor of maintaining the prohibition of marijuana, or is that pointless? Is it time for legalizing? And do you have a concern that if it's legalized, there'd be chartered challenges to make the more, as I said, arguably more dangerous drugs like heroin and cocaine legally available in this country? Jodie, would you agree that decriminalizing is not the way to go? It's either going to be prohibition or legalization.
Well, we have to end prohibition and legalize it entirely. But when we look to the United States, they began with medical marijuana in California, and now there are 19 medical marijuana states and I think 14 or 15 decriminalization states. So even though neither of those provide safety or access for all, they're a stepping stone. And because of those states doing those small steps, you were able to get Colorado and Washington to go all the way with legalization. So it's not ideal, but if we can protect young people from getting criminal records that haunt them for the rest of their lives and lost opportunities, that's at least saving some lives. But we do need to address the criminal control of the market, which is really the problem associated.
Now, the feds in the United States are challenging some of the states who have decriminalized or legalized marijuana. That we know. The argument continues, and I've said this many times in the past as well. Lenny Bruce, the famous or infamous, if you prefer, comedian, said in the 60s, marijuana will be legal in 10 years. Why? Because all the law students are smoking it now. So, joke, but it's been in the public view and on the public agenda for decades. The question is, 1-877-399-9898. Would you agree? Do you agree with what Jodie Emery said, that it's time to legalize, and what Justin Trudeau is saying, it's time to legalize marijuana, end the prohibition, not decriminalize, but legalize? Or would you argue that it is time to, or we must maintain the prohibition on weed? 1-877-399-9898, Green Show on the Chorus Radio Network. Follow me on Twitter at The Roy Green Show, emails to roy@roygreenshow.com. Jodie Emery is my guest, and we're talking about the regulation or deregulation, legalizing marijuana, which is what Justin Trudeau is now saying that he would do if he were the Prime Minister of this country, changing his tune. I want to hear what you have to say. You've heard Jodie's point of view. Do you think it's time for us to have marijuana legally available in this country, taxes collected, and regulations in place, and putting maybe the gangs out of business? Lots of emails over the last times we've talked about this issue suggested it would do nothing to put the gangs out of business because they would simply have more potent marijuana on the streets than the government would allow. Chuck in Regina. Chuck, what do you say?
It's 2013. We already know the reason why that this drug is not legal is because the United States of America doesn't want it to be. If anybody watched Mr. Emery's documentary, Prince of Pot, it was clearly laid out that they said, look, if you decriminalize marijuana in Canada, we're going to do kind of the same thing that we did to you when you didn't participate in Iraq. Oh, let's give you mad cow disease, maybe a little bit of softwood lumber problems, and it went away. That's the single only reason. It's the United States of America dictating policy on another country.
So why wouldn't the United States then legalize marijuana? You've got individual states, as Jodie pointed out, and as we know.
And
why would...
That's the hypocrisy of it. Ask Obama, ask the DEA, the ATF. Look at all the money that they're getting out of people for some simple non-victimless crimes. It was already in the biography. The United States of America already says no, that you guys will not be doing this. Right, Mrs. Emery?
Well, it's true that Obama is even right now raiding dispensaries in Washington state where legalization has passed. So the Obama administration, believe it or not, has been worse than George W. Bush with respect to enforcing pot prohibition.
So if that's the case, then you, Chuck, and you, Jody, would believe that it should be correct, then Justin Trudeau should fly in the face of American opposition and possible American retaliation, trade or otherwise, and legalize marijuana.
Well, luckily for Justin, there are presidents of countries also connected to the United States, Mexico, and many Central and Southern American countries are saying we need to legalize it, and those are leaders of countries. So it's not as scary.
You know what I'm saying, though? If we're going to fly in the face of possible American retaliation, then that has to be considered, if that, in fact, is a valid argument. David in Winnipeg. Go ahead, David.
Yes, I'm a concerned citizen and a taxpayer. I agree with your guest's point of view. I just wanted to mention something. I'm not sure if other people have had this thought before. It's about the gateway drug thing and the fact that society has said that marijuana is so dangerous, and has been saying so for so long. I think what happens is some people, they try marijuana, and then they realize it's not as harmful as society has been telling them it has been, and then they think, well, maybe other drugs aren't as dangerous either, and then they move on to harder drugs, which is not a good thing.
Well, I'll tell you, Serge Leclerc, before he passed away, was a fairly regular contributor to this show. He ran one of Canada's largest criminal organizations, drug crime organizations, for many years, spent more than 20 years in special handling units in federal prisons, then became a member of the Saskatchewan legislature, but he said that as far as he's concerned and his experience as a drug dealer, lifelong drug dealer, that marijuana definitely is a gateway drug to worse drugs, to more harmful drugs. That's been a debating point for quite some time. Thank you for the call, David. Jody, what about that? I mean, I know you're going to disagree with that point, but we have someone who was a drug dealer, organized crime drug dealer for decades, stating we used marijuana as an introductory and gateway drug.
Well, if he's selling the marijuana and he's the guy people need to go to, he's going to be the one offering them their drugs that they'll come into contact with. You know, people don't go buy tobacco and get offered a bottle of liquor with it all the time. You know, you can't really do that legally. So the underground, that does happen. But I would also venture to guess that he tried alcohol before he tried marijuana, if he was speaking about a gateway theory. The gateway theory is that once you try something, you go on to others. But we all know pot smokers, whether you want to out them or not. You think of somebody, you know they're a pot smoker.
I know pot smokers. You know pot smokers clearly. Yeah, you smoke pot. Mark smoked pot. Millions of people worldwide smoke pot. Right. We all know somebody who smokes pot.
Exactly, and they're not all using cocaine.
And to be fair, they're not afraid to smoke pot because they feel that they're not going to be touched by the authorities for smoking pot unless they're dealing reasonably large amounts or doing what your husband did.
Right, but the point we're bringing up is that people use pot all over this country, millions of people every day, but they aren't turning into junkies on the East End. They aren't injecting heroin into their veins through some gateway theory. People make choices whether to use a substance too much or not. I mean, and we can talk about milk being a gateway theory. I mean, every drug addict started with mother's milk. Is that what led them to that path?
Let me put Frank on the air in Toronto. Frank, you take a different point of view.
I do, Roy. You know, I ask myself the question in answering whether or not I agree or not is what kind of future generation are we wanting to create and or prepare for? You know, we've heard so many negative aspects with marijuana that has been proven through empirical evidence. Number one, motivation goes down. Number two, there's a problem with memory loss. And the other issue now that's questionable is the issue with health care costs going up. We're already competing for health care costs now in Ontario. In fact, in some cases, cancer recipients are having problems getting a certain medication, Avastin, for cancer treatment. Now, if the health care costs increase with marijuana, I mean, where do our priorities lie? I think this is one of the biggest factors why I disagree.
Frank, a valid argument, but at the same time, marijuana is so readily available and so widely used. We have to come to a conclusion on what we do about the substance. We can't have a law in place that isn't properly enforced. That doesn't do anyone any good. All it does is create a weaker dynamic potentially for other legislation. I think we have to come to a conclusion on this. And I would venture that the as with a younger generation and with politicians and with public health officials and all of the other individuals we talked about in public life starting to edge toward legalizing marijuana, that's going to be the inevitability. And we're going to have to deal with it.
I'm also just as outraged that healthcare costs, we're not getting the health services we deserve. Taxpayers give away almost half their income in taxes, and we know huge amounts are supposed to go to healthcare. But if you're ticked off about that, you better call up your police department, call the federal courts, and call all these police and prisons and say, listen, you're spending billions of dollars enforcing something, and if it is bad for people and dangerous for people, arresting our teenagers and arresting adults for using marijuana is not going to help them. It's not going to make marijuana safe.
Okay, Jodie, I have about a minute and a half. Tell me what's going on with Mark and the decision that you and he have to make about his time in a U.S. prison or transferring back to Canada.
Well, it's very confusing because the Conservatives are punishing people for trying to get home, but we've decided that it is great to be home, and we're encouraging people to endorse his transfer. Get the Public Safety Minister, Stephen Blaney, to bring Mark home. He could be out by next June and be off conditions by October.
But what was the issue? What did you have to face?
It was that he could have been punished even longer in Canada if he came home than he would be in the United States. He gets kicked out of America next July, no matter what. But the Conservatives have made it very punitive to be in prison in Canada. So we were unsure, but at this point we really think it's best for us to try and get him home quickly. So at our website, freemark.ca, and that's Mark with a C, the front page has the phone numbers to politely call the Government of Canada and say, bring this Canadian home.
Let me put Joe on the line in Burnaby, British Columbia. We have about 45 seconds. There are many who would say that our Canadian justice system in situations like that is far from being punitive, but that's a debate for another day. Joe, we have a few seconds. Use them up, please.
Okay, well, to the caller that said, what kind of generation are we raising with these kids smoking pot? Well, I got two that actually smoke pot, one that doesn't. The one that doesn't smoke pot, doesn't drink, sits at home, plays video games, he's in worse shape physically. Him and his buddies sit around eating pizza, drinking pop. The ones that smoke pot are out there but got better jobs. I just wonder. I think we put a little bit too much emphasis on what pot does or doesn't do.
Joe, I appreciate the call. Jodie, thank you very much. The time has come for a decision. The government says it's going to retain the prohibition on marijuana. The opposition now is looking favorably toward legalizing it. It'll be the voters' choice in the next election, and I suspect that is going to be a significant issue. Thanks so much for the time, Jodie.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back on the Roy Green Show on the Corus Radio Network, Dr. Frank Farley, and we'll talk about Anthony WIENER and what it is that drives people like WIENER to do what he's doing. Stay with us. Emails to roy@roygreenshow.com showing about roughly 50-50, either in favor of legalizing or maintaining the prohibition on marijuana. roy@roygreenshow.com. And post your comments on my blog, roygreenshow.com.